So next, we have another great speaker who is going to be talking about injecting innovation in the newsroom in South Asia, what the mobile-first opportunity is. Rajan Anandan is Vice President and MD for Google Southeast Asia and India. He's responsible for sales and operations in India and is focused on expanding the internet ecosystem in the region, increasing adoption and consumers and businesses, as well as accelerating innovation. He joined Google in early 2011 to lead Google's business here in India, and his career includes leadership roles at Microsoft, Dell, and McKinsey. So please join me in giving WAN-IFRA a warm welcome to Rajan Anandan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Hi, everyone. Morning. While he's setting up, first of all, thank you for having us here. We're delighted to be partners in the event, and also it's great to see all of you here bright and early on a Monday morning. What I'm going to do is really two things. One, I thought it'd be good just to give you a brief snapshot of where the internet is in India. Hopefully, all of you are. I'm looking around the room. Looks like at least 80% of you are actually from India, so you're well aware of where things are at in India. And then second, talk really about a few important trends. I think the cover of the slide gives it away, sort of the mobile trend, but also a few other trends. And then most importantly, what we wanted to do, Anuvrat, who's one of my colleagues who's here, is going to, actually we're launching a very exciting initiative specifically focused on helping news publishers improve their capabilities and their assets, dramatically improve the performance of the assets on the mobile web. So that's really the main thing we want to talk about, but I thought it'd be helpful for us to give you a bit of context. So first things first, it took India about 10 years to go from 10 million internet users to 100 million internet users. It took 3 years to go from 100 million to 200 million. The journey from 200 million users to 300 million users took 2 years. And as of the end of December, we had 350 million internet users. Last month, India added 6 million new internet users. I was thrilled to hear the presentation from Norway just before me. So Norway has an entire population of 5 million. Last month, we added 6 million new internet users. Now, what we would love to have is the GDP per capita of Norway combined with the population of India. But quite frankly, we're just still getting started as an internet economy. These are some of the numbers that you saw at the beginning of 2011 is when we crossed 100 million users. Now, what's important to note is 2011, when India crossed 100 million internet users, we had about 20 million connected smartphone users, right? So it was really not a smartphone economy. At the end of December, when we had 350 million internet users, we crossed 150 million connected smartphone users, right? So today we have 150 million connected smartphone users. Again, going back to the discussion that you just had before, India is already there, at least with the first 150 million Indians. They're connected on smartphones. They're spending about 2 to 3 hours a day on smartphones. But quite frankly, at 350 million, we still only have, little less than 30% of our entire population, almost 30% of our population that's connected, country of 1.2 billion. So we have another billion Indians that we need to connect over the next decade. And what's going to be very exciting is over the next 2 years, we're at the beginning of 2015, the current industry projection is that by 2017, the exit 2017, we will have 500 million Indians online and 400 million of them will access the internet through their smartphones, right? So these are actually very, very large numbers. And I think one of the things you'll hear me talk about, and then hopefully you'll get a sense of when Anuvrat gets up here is, we think this game, what it really means for any publisher, news or otherwise, is how do you significantly increase the reach of your products, right? Now, obviously, your products also need to be different. It's still news, but it needs to be different. And I think this morning, from our opening speaker, you got a pretty good sense of how it needs to be different to cater to this new audience. But we are talking about, pretty large scale, getting larger by the day, going towards a number that's very, very large. Probably the single most important trend or consumer dynamic that you need to know of when it comes to the internet in India, it's a mobile internet. 350 million users, 65% of these 350 million internet users in India only access the internet through a mobile device. They do not access the internet through a desktop or notebook. 100% of the growth, 6 million new internet users added to the India every month, 100% of that growth is mobile only. Right? I actually moved to India a decade ago to run Dell in India, and I built Dell for many years. And I remember when I left Dell, which is about 7 years ago, the country was shipping about 10 million PCs a year, desktops and notebooks. Guess what the number was last year in India? 7 years later, 11 million. No growth. Smartphones went from essentially being non-existent, at that point actually were non-existent, to being the fastest growing smartphone market in the world. So 65% of users are mobile only. So winning in the internet really is about winning in mobile. And increasingly it's about winning mobile on smartphones, right? So that's sort of the very, very important thing to keep in mind. The other important thing to keep in mind is we are now very much into what I call the local language Indian internet. Country of 1.2 billion people, less than 200 million Indians are proficient in English. So actually those of us in this room are really, don't represent all of India, right? And all of you actually know this. Over 1 billion Indians actually aren't proficient in English. So less than 200 million Indians are proficient in English. The internet already has 350 million connected users. Over the last 18 months, almost every single new internet user in India actually is not proficient in English. So guess what's happening? Massive growth in the non-English Indian internet. Last quarter, so if you look at the October, November, December quarter, and you look at content consumption on the Indian internet, Hindi content grew 84% year on year. English content consumption grew 10% year on year. So Hindi content last quarter grew 5 times faster than English content. Now obviously Hindi content is still off a smaller base, right? English is still a bigger base. If you look at queries, search queries, which is obviously something that we know a little bit about, local language search queries in India are growing 10 times faster than English language search queries. So the local language internet is already here, but quite frankly, it's just still starting. Because our estimate is that by 2020, when India will at that point probably have about 700 million internet users, 500 million of those users will access the internet through Indian languages, right? So if you're a Hindi internet product, you should be able to reach 300 million users. If you're a Tamil internet product, you should be able to reach over 100 million global audience, right? And this is just India numbers. So first thing is it's mobile only. The second important thing is, it is already local language getting larger by the day. So obviously, and this is probably, very, very relevant to all of you. Now that's really on content consumption and user behavior. What is also actually very interesting is what we are seeing in terms of Hindi advertisers getting activated and Hindi advertising. So this actually looks at AdSense, which is a Google display network, right? And the simple way to think about this is the blue line is the Hindi inventory of ads. The green line is English inventory of ads. This is ad inventory, okay? This is not this is not user consumption. It's actually ad inventory. And what this really shows is by mid 2017, Hindi ad inventory will overtake English ad inventory. So not only are users coming online and spending enormous time on local language consumption, the local language internet ad market, which today, by the way, is very small, is also growing very rapidly. And we expect, at least on an ad serve basis, not revenue, but on an ad serve basis, will actually cross over English sometime in mid 2017. The other important thing two other important things I want to highlight. First, last year, digital advertising in India crossed $1 billion. Group M estimates this year that digital advertising will grow 50% year on year. So this year, digital ads goes from $1 billion last year to $1.5 billion this year. And if it obviously grows even at 30-35%, you could imagine what will happen by 2020. We're going to have actually a very large multi-billion-dollar advertising market. So the second question I think that everybody had even 2 or 3 years ago, which is, yep, we get it, there's a large number of users on the internet, but what about advertising? There are no advertising dollars. When I joined Google, I remember 5 years ago, the entire digital ad market was $120 million. Last year was $1 billion. This year is going to be $1.5 billion, right? So we've clearly hit the tipping point on advertising. So you've got not just ad queries, the ad market, and now really the question is, how do you really build products and go to market in such a way where you can capture a large part of that? Probably the last thing when it comes to advertising is we've seen an explosion in online video. If you look at the leading online video platforms, YouTube and the other platforms put together, they already reach over 100 million unique Indians every month, already. Now, keep in mind, this is before India has broadband. Imagine what's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 years as we actually go from a nation that doesn't have broadband to a nation that has some broadband. My view is it's going to be a long time before we have lots of broadband, right? Today, we have no broadband. So even before we have any broadband, and for those of you that are visiting, by the way, you'll hear a lot about 3G and 4G, but the reality is most of our 3G connections don't really give us 3G because of a whole set of issues, right? So even before the advent of broadband, we've crossed 100 million unique users on online video across multiple platforms. Imagine what's going to happen when we actually have broadband. Now, the exciting thing about online video in India is on a monetization basis, online video today yields more than television. Mobile, video, local language. And you get a large number of users on your platform with obviously the right set of content and so on and so forth. You're in kind of business. Now, the last thing I want to sort of talk a little bit about is as India goes from, let's say, 350 million users today to 500 million, 700 million, and 1 billion, the set of users that are going to come on board are going to be very different. Some things will be the same, like mobile only, and also increasingly local language, but also there are going to be a number of things that are quite different. 60% of urban India today is online. The new set of use, so if you look at how do you characterize the internet user today? 350 million users. Largely urban, largely male, largely young. That's sort of what it is. The new users who are coming online, largely women, older, and increasingly from rural India. Of the 350 million users, only 100 million actually come from rural India. That's amazing, because rural India has 800 million people. 800 million rural Indians, only 100 million connected. Guess what? A lot of the growth is now coming from rural India. So that's the picture that you actually see in the middle. You can't probably see it in the back. Actually, so basically, older, women, rural. That's where the new user is coming from, right? Now, these users are going to be very similar to the last couple of 100 million in that they'll be mobile only. They obviously will only access the internet and find the internet useful in local languages. But they'll have a few other differences. They can only afford highly affordable smartphones, right? Today, you can buy a very decent quality smartphone for about 5,000 rupees. I know there's been a new product that was apparently launched called 251. Let's set that aside for a minute. But the reality is, these new users cannot afford 5,000 rupees. So over the next 18 to 24 months, we will see the cost of smartphones, quality smartphones, I don't mean poor quality, I mean reasonable quality smartphones come down. And we believe that when we actually hit a 3,000 and then 2,000 rupee price point as an ecosystem is when we are going to see a massive number of feature phone users switch over to become smartphones. The other thing is a lot of these rural users, because they're in, let's say, tier 4, tier 5 towns in rural India, have poor connectivity, slow networks, intermittent networks. And as a result, they're going to have to use products that work very well in poor intermittent networks. Actually, it's not just them. Even us living in NCR, as many of you know, we actually get reasonably intermittent poor networks. But it gets a lot worse, as many of you know, as you go to rural India. So that actually is pretty important because we actually believe that India will be the first country in the world that will have what I call the offline internet. It's very interesting. Why offline internet, you'd ask me, right? Offline internet because the internet doesn't work most of the time. So it should work offline. And the second thing is affordability. 100 rupees or 200 rupees in India is a huge amount of money for the average Indian. If you go beyond the first 50, 100 million Indians, 200 rupees is actually a lot of money. And today, as you know, although India has, on a relative basis, very low-cost mobile data plans, if you compare that to income per capita of India, it's actually very expensive, our mobile data plans, right? So you combine these two things, slow intermittent networks combined with acute affordability challenges, all of a sudden, if your product actually works offline, boom, you have something that's very, very interesting. In India, we launched YouTube offline about 14 months ago. Fastest growing product we've ever launched as Google in India. So what is YouTube offline? You pick the videos that you want. You've got to be connected. You offline your videos. And for 48 hours, you can watch as many videos as you want. No buffering, no cost. We took Maps offline. Boom, takes off. Actually, the most interesting content startups that are being launched in India right now, they're being designed, guess what? Offline first. How do we make this app work amazingly well offline? Hello English, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's the #1 language learning app in India. It's a startup from Jaipur. 700,000 Indians use this product every single day. 10 million Indians have used it to learn English for the last 6 months. 70% of content consumption offline. Right? So you got to do those kinds of things, right, to address both the intermediate network connectivity issues and the affordability. And then the last thing I think that's very, very important is, for these set of users, the internet is not a good to have. I'm a little careful when I say this, but the reality is, for all of us in this room, if the internet goes away tomorrow, we'd be okay. Don't get me wrong, I'm from Google. I'd be in bad shape. But we'd be okay, right? We'd all find things to do, and we were fine. Most of us, I'm just looking around the room, we were all fine when the internet everybody wasn't online all the time. We were fine, right? 15 years ago. But actually, for these set of new users, especially in rural India, the internet is really going to be critical for their livelihood. We have an initiative called Helping Women Get Online, where we it's called Internet Sati, right? Where we have bicycles, we train women with these bicycles to go into villages and do ground level activation, where we actually educate rural women on what the internet is and give them first-hand experience of how using the internet. First, our hypothesis going in was, what would be the use cases that they'd be most excited about? Messaging, social, video, etc. No. Actually, they found that kind of interesting, but as one woman told me, he says, who do I message? Everybody that I know is in this village. I just walk over, right? Oh, that's interesting. Because, there are actually no roads to get to this village, right? Actually, the apps that they find most interesting are the apps, or the products, I should say, websites, apps, etc., are the ones that actually help them improve their livelihoods. Their eyes light up when you say, what? Here's the weather for the next couple of months in this village. So, here are the agricultural practices. Here are some of the things you could do to actually improve yields on your crops. Here's what you could do about your children's, healthcare or education. These are the things, interestingly, that they find most useful, because remember, these are consumers that actually didn't have access to this kind of information. New government schemes that are launched. Do you know that on average, an Indian has to travel 2 to 3 hours to find out about a new government scheme? Amazing stat. Now all of a sudden, just click aside, boom, I know what the scheme is. And if you overlay that with Aadhaar and everything else that the government is doing, imagine in India where at the click of a button or just accessing the internet, all of a sudden all the schemes that can be available. So these are the kinds of, so in many different ways, this next billion users are going to be very, very different. And I think for all of you, as you're thinking about building, adapting your products, adapting your content, adapting your services to not just the first 350 million users, but to this next billion users, and I think you should keep in mind actually some of these things. Now news, not surprisingly, you're all here, is big in India. This actually looks at, there are two colors here. One is the green line, number of minutes spent per day on news apps, and the red line is number of minutes spent per day on chat apps. The good news is, look, 350 million users, 150 million smartphone users, so you can look at this data as representative of about, about 40% of the Indian internet. On average, 37 minutes of news consumption on news apps. That's pretty good, actually, 37 minutes per day. 37 minutes per day per user on news apps. Because it's a news app, it's really a smartphone user, right? So that's actually pretty good, and if you look at it, it's only number 2, within Asia, it's only number 2 behind Australia and Japan. So that's actually pretty good. Now, winning in this new era, that being said, does require at least a few set of capabilities. And I think this morning, I was very excited to hear what they're doing in Norway, right? But I thought, maybe some of these things could be added to, especially winning in online news in a country like India, and specifically India, right? I think the first one is web and apps. I think as a country, we've been very, very enamored by apps. Over the last 18 months, everything became an app. Right? Now, the problem with everything becoming an app is, here's a very interesting statistic. 90% of apps get uninstalled within 6 weeks in India. 90%. So which means like any app that you download is guaranteed it's going to get uninstalled. Why is that? Actually, it's not because your app isn't great. Well, firstly, very few apps need to be used every day. One could argue, hey, news apps can be used every day. Actually, the reason is because the affordability challenge in India. 38% of all smartphone users have only 512 of memory, which means they can only have a few apps. And if your app isn't that compelling where they have to use it every single day, it's a must-have app, they're going to uninstall it, right? So having both a great web presence as well as an app, especially if you're news, I think is very, very important. So you've seen companies, by the way, like Flipkart now come back to the web, but come back to the web with a product that looks a lot like an app, but is really a web. So I don't have to deal with the uninstall problem, right? You can send notifications. It's location aware, and all the benefits that you would get from an app, you can actually now get from the mobile web. So over the next 18 months, what you're going to see is the mobile web essentially will have all the functionality that an app can have. So as a publisher, it becomes very, very important that you are web and app. The second one is video. Especially from a monetization standpoint, I think it's very important for any content creation. Look, I'm not in your business, I don't know your business, but what I can tell you is looking at it from an ad standpoint in India, where we have had historically very low CPMs across all sectors, TV, print, etc. Actually, print has better CPMs than television in India. To actually get the kind of monetization, combined with the fact that these new users, they just prefer images and video. They just prefer it. I mean, we heard that from the previous speaker as well. So actually having a large video component to your play makes sense. And then and I think it's also important, this idea of offline. I actually think that this idea of offline is really important. I'm a big fan of Economic Times. I don't know whether there's anybody here from Economic Times. I don't get the paper anymore. I just either read the app offline or go to the web on my way to work. And fortunately, I live in South Delhi and I work in Gurgaon, so it takes me 45 minutes to get to work minimum, which gives me more than adequate time to get up to speed with the news. So that's the second big thing. And the last one, as we've talked about, is localized content, not just in Indian languages, but again, content that is very local and very, very relevant. Now, given this massive opportunity that we have, the question really is, how can we help as you all kind of go through this journey? Obviously, there are many ways in which we can help, but one of the biggest challenges to the mobile web is speed. And the initiative that I'm going to have Anurag now come and talk about is called AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages, and it's something that we are very, very excited about because it will hopefully help many of you improve the performance, and when I say performance, speed of your products, especially when it comes to the mobile web. So that's pretty much all I had. Now I'm going to hand it over to Anurag to come and talk about AMP in a little more detail and also show you a demo. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rajan. So I'm Anurag. I actually work for our product teams at Google. I wanted to start off by asking you guys a question. How many of you have heard of AMP or Accelerated Mobile Pages? Quick show of hands. Okay, 25%, that's not bad. Let me start off by why AMP. So as the previous slide was saying, speed is one of the biggest challenges on mobile today, especially in a place like India. And what we wanted to do with AMP had one big focus. We wanted to make content loading and content access instant. And I mean instant. On the mobile web, on a mobile phone, always. So there's going to be a lot of things about AMP, but that's the main thing we're trying to go for. And as a product guy, I thought I'd show you AMP live on my phone, and then after that, we'll get into a little bit about the technology. Does that sound good? Okay, so can I just switch to the demo, please? All right, let me know if you can see this. Let me adjust this a little bit. Oh. Is that clear for folks? Is that visible? Okay. So let me start off by showing you what Google looks like today. This is Google Search. So I'm in Google Search, and I'm going to search for something, JNU News, hot topic today, right? You get some articles. This is what search has always done. Let's try and click on one of these. You see the loading bar, white screen. I wait, and now I get the article. And I can scroll and I can read. Okay, that's not too bad, but that's not quite instant, right? You'd agree with me, not really instant. And I'm on a Wi-Fi connection. Imagine 3G and 2G in India. This is going to be much worse. Let me try another one. Let's try business standard here. I wait. That's not bad. That's a little faster, but still not exactly instant. Now let me show you AMP. When we launch this, this is what it's going to look like. Let me make the same search again in Google. And this is what you'll see. We have this carousel. So the news results are still there. These results, just as always. But you have this carousel at the top. This is AMP files. So all of these files are just news articles, but they're made in AMP. It comes as a carousel on the top of search results. Pretty beautiful. You have the logo. You can see some of the leading publications in India already live with AMP. NDTV, Business Standard, India Today, they're all already doing AMP. And the idea here is it's instant loading. So just see, when I click on one of these articles, it's there. Did not even take half a second. You can try something else, maybe BBC, instant. You can swipe right, takes you to the next article, and the next, and the next, and the next, and it's pretty much instant. I've tried this on 3G, I've tried this on 2G. It's still pretty instant. It's about a second on 2G. It's not too bad. Now, I want to say that this is actually not just a Google search thing. AMP is an open web standard format. It actually can work in any platform if they want to implement it. And I want to show you a platform called Nuzzle. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's a bit like Flipboard or Daily Hunt in India. It's a news aggregating site, news aggregating app, actually. And so they also now support AMP. So if someone publishes an AMP HTML file, they actually host that as well. I want to show you a normal article in here. So the Medium article here, this is a normal article. Takes a while, blank screen, I'm waiting. Okay, and it loads. Again, not really instant, but it's there. And let me show you how AMP works in here. So New York Times, down here, they're a publisher that's doing AMP. You get a lightning bolt, and then it loads. That's like a UI thing they've done to show it's AMP. And that's basically what AMP is. It's a platform. Can I switch back to the slides? It's a platform, and it's a way of publishing that allows for the mobile web to become instant and super, super fast, right? So how does this work? How do we make this instant mobile web experience? At the top here, this is what is going on currently. So most publishers, you'd publish an HTML file, put it on your server, and users access that. A lot of the times, the tech guys would put a lot of effort to optimizing this to try and make it as fast as possible. What we wanted to do with AMP was to take all that burden away and let the AMP project or the AMP format do that for you. And there's sort of three things in this which make it this instant. There is the format itself. It's called AMP HTML. So you put out a file that's called an AMP HTML file. There's nothing special about it. It's still HTML, but it has some smart technology in it which makes it much more optimized for mobile, asynchronous loading, and things like that. Also, AMP files get cached in something called the AMP cache. And so actually that content comes much closer to the user, and it loads from that. So it's, again, making it much quicker, reducing server load, and reducing the probability that something loads slowly. And thirdly, it's pre-rendering. This is another way in which files become much faster. And it's not just Google search. So you'll see the icons there, Pinterest and Twitter. They're also platforms that are going to be supporting AMP and are going to go live pretty shortly. I want to end by just telling you some of the 4 pillars of AMP. Analytics, it's one of the first ones. So if a publisher is using any of these platforms, let's say ComScore, let's say Chartbeat, all of that works in AMP. Nothing changes for a publisher. Your analytics, your reporting stays the same, and it works in AMP. We wanted to make sure this was the case because we're doing this for the open web. Access, if you have paywalls or subscriptions, that will work in AMP, no problems there. Advertising, another critical piece. There's so many ad networks out there. We want to ensure that the advertising from all those networks works in AMP. And most of the leading ones are already supporting AMP, and that list is growing every day. And lastly, the format itself. I've personally been working with a lot of publishers trying to get AMP implemented, much like the ones you saw in the demo. And they all give me some interesting feedback that actually they found AMP really easy. They also found it really flexible. You could do lots of things in it. You can do image carousels, navigations. It doesn't really stifle any of the creativity. And most of these publishers, their AMP files actually look very much like HTML. And so any normal user that goes to these things can't actually tell the difference, apart from the fact that it just loads that much faster and that much better. So I think that this is, again, a very important initiative from Google. Like Rajan said, mobile is a huge opportunity. Web is where the reach is. And if you can make the web work in an open, collaborative way, then that's all the much better for all the publishers, for the users, and for the ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rajan, and thank you, Anuvrat. I think we have time for one question if Anuvrat would like to field one. Any questions yet? Right here.
Hi, I'm Badri. I'm from Wipro. The question to Mr. Anurag.
Yeah.
How about the video players with respect to AMP? How does it work?
Sure. Any particular video player you're talking about, or?
JW player.
General. So let me give you an example, actually. So Brightcove, this is a video player, right? They actually came to us and said, hey, we heard about AMP. How do we make sure Brightcove works in AMP? Pretty straightforward. We share, you go to the ampproject.org. It's a public website. It's open source, right? The whole idea of AMP is open source. So Brightcove was then allowed to work with this library. They produced some code and produced some tags that now sit in the AMP library for AMP. And so what happens now is, if I'm now a publisher, I can use that piece of script in my AMP HTML file, and Brightcove starts working. In fact, we haven't even launched yet, and we've done about 48 releases and 15,000 product editions. It's pretty crazy. Like, it's super open. Like, new advertising networks, new video platforms, new functionality keeps getting added every day.
Great. Thank you very much.